Hello and howdy from the Baru Art World headquarters, where we're going to take some simple pens, markers, and paper, and we're going to sketch some expressive buildings using character and whimsy. We don't even need to get all crazy with perfect perspective lines and straight edges because, well, being a little bit messy is part of the charm. Here's how I like to start, just with a simple sketch of a scene. I'll sketch out some simple blocks in some sort of rudimentary perspective, nothing exact. I know that if it doesn't look right, I'll just adjust it later. So I'm thinking about doing sort of a run-down building, but colorful, and tall and skinny because, well, that's the shape of my paper. I do like to exaggerate building proportions and even distort visual perspective in these drawings because I think it gives me more opportunities to do something interesting. I think we kind of needed a sad potted plant here, don't you think? Now I can choose whatever colors feel right. And for this, I want something that's really colorful and bold. And I very rarely use fluorescent sorts of markers, but for this, I think that's where I want to start, and I will maybe knock down the vibrancy just a notch or two later. I'm using a huge collection of alcohol markers by Ohuhu, but you could use any, really. I tend to go with alcohol markers because they blend really nicely, though. So I do tend to use those. Winsor & Newton makes a line that they call Pro markers, and they have some beautiful colors for more realistic architectural sketching. They have more muted colors and neutrals that I really like for this sort of thing. But for now, I'll just make do with what I have. So I'm just inventing this structure in my head, much of it as I go. And as I get more concrete with my building here in my head, I'm introducing a fine liner to really solidify the structure. I'm being really loose with my lines. If they're crooked or shaky, I'm not going to worry at all. In fact, I don't want perfection here. I'm going for something that's expressive, feelings, not a photograph. Maybe some area seems blank and it needs to be filled. There are things that you could do about that. Incidentally, as I was searching for that clip, I realized I have no idea how to spell zhuzh. Please enlighten me if you can and comment on that below. I'd really like to know. Anyway, back to the markers. If you do start light with your markers, they are actually really forgiving if you need to add something unexpected or to layer texture with different colors on top of previous markers. It will usually work out just fine. I also like to add objects of interest here and there. Also gives the viewer something to look at as they view the finished drawing. Details of, little barred up windows, a small red rug, and things like that. And then you can use a paint pen or Posca pen to highlight some areas where you need to go a little bit lighter than you can with the markers. So, adding some details to the siding and little bits here and there. And don't forget to sign it. I love how this involves the viewer because it suggests a story that needs to be invented. What's the story here? Is the bicycle broken or abandoned? What's with that crumpled up siding? I'd love to know what you see. I started a new sketch, and as sometimes the case, I changed my mind. I originally imagined a monster ripping off the top part of a building, but I began to see that the monster was probably more like a friendly Bigfoot Sasquatch type creature, and he meant no real harm. I liked the shape of the structure I had drawn, but I really needed to change it, I thought. So I decided an ice cream cone. Maybe one of those fiberglass type advertisement ice cream cones, and this Bigfoot just wanted to head home with a tasty snack. This time I had a more concrete image in my head of what I wanted to draw. So instead of using markers first, I'm starting off with my fine liner. Here I'm using a hard nib Fude pen by Faber-Castell. I really like the Fude tip because I can vary the line weight a bit, and for drawings like these where I want some imperfection, this works out really well. I've also used brush pens that can give you lots and lots more variation, and those are pretty useful too, but I'm just not as skilled with that, and this is the one I tend to grab. And like in the last drawing, I'm adding little bits and bobs here and there. An electric meter, a trash can, gutters, downspouts, even some rubble and debris, which is a remnant from when a more hostile monster was ripping open a building. But I did like the look of these little concrete chunks in the foreground. Thought it gave it a little bit of visual depth. I love inventing these little worlds. And they don't need to make sense. Like, why is this little ice cream shop with a mansard roof in the middle of what looks like a major metropolis? And yet, this must be close enough to some great grand forest too, because, well, Bigfoot needs to reside somewhere. We may never know the true answers to these questions. One of the secrets to getting some depth and variation with the markers is to leave some white space and to be a little bit uneven with the lines. And in subsequent layers of markers, you can even go over some of those white areas, but you'll be left with multiple variations of those two marker colors and white. Now, I didn't do much of this on this particular drawing, but you can hint at shadows and sun streaks just by changing the angle of your marker strokes and leaving some open areas. You'll notice here, as I add stripes to the awning and to the roof, that I'm not staying within the lines. And this is purposeful. When you see the final drawing, you won't notice that sort of thing. But what you will see is something that's a little bit looser, more fun, and something that has more of a whimsical personality. With this sort of style, I think it's best to just hint at some things. For instance, I'm not going to draw 1,000 bricks on the side of this building. Instead, I'll just punctuate maybe 10 or 15 little bricks, and that will just give you the idea. Also, if you look in the background at that city, I'm really just hinting at it. It's not the focus of the drawing. It's just there for feel. So with some simple shadows and hints at antennas and windows, I think it's sufficient for this type of drawing. I've also used some composition strategies to my advantage here, which is a wonderful reason why I want to draw more from my imagination, because life doesn't always give me the best composition. You might notice that the focal points are mostly using the rule of thirds. The top third line is where the cone and Bigfoot's salivating face is, and also the vertical third line to the right is where his face is. And the bottom third line is the ice cream shop with its sign. But I also wanted to make sure that the viewer looked in the center where the broken supports were. So using leading lines almost like an arrow from the cone leads the eye there. And the mansard-style roof also angles inwards, again sort of leading the eye to what might otherwise be overlooked. I think if I were to do this again, I might move the ice cream sign to the left side of the building to sort of move the eye around a bit more. But I do like the end composition of this. I think it works out pretty well and definitely has some personality. I don't always, or usually, work in a straight line when it comes to art. Now, as a person, I'm pretty structured. I'm a rule follower, and I generally do what's expected of me. I am silly, though. I'm 100% in favor of harmless pranks and doing senseless things like, well, I told a friend of mine that I drove 6 hours to see the world's largest killer bee. Fiberglass, not a bee in captivity, which would be weird, and also something I might do. I've been known to drive 90 minutes just for pizza because sometimes the journey is important and memorable. I'm a rule follower, but not within the framework of how I choose to view life or art, which is where this tangent was going. I started this drawing as a birdhouse, and my idea was to have it populated by birds in various places. But it got too busy compositionally, and I needed bigger paper really to do that thought any justice. So that's fine. I'll just make this into some sort of shop/residence. But I still had this bird perch on the front, which I kind of liked. So I kept it. Does it make any sense? Not really. But that perch gave me an opportunity to hang something from it. And at first I thought, oh, well, maybe a flag or something. But then I had a vision of whatever this thing is. Is it a punching bag? A boulder? I don't know. And I like not knowing. It's a thing to wonder about. I talked earlier about leaving white space with markers, and you can see how I'm doing this here. Now in the final drawing, this effect will be subtle, but it'll give the siding just a bit of variation that can read as shadow or distress or possibly just a poor paint job. But it will give it a different dimension other than just a flat block of color. I try to embrace these little variations, even though they aren't hitting you over the head in the final piece. The viewer is more likely to see the overall feeling than think, oh, is that rust or something like that. If they do think that, I'd be very happy because that's getting into the realm of studying the art. Something like this probably isn't worth that much consideration for most people, but it's there if someone wants it. Art that reads on multiple levels to me is something to strive for. You know, the feeling will come first, and I'm striving for maybe a happy, quirky sort of thing. I'd actually imagined, after I abandoned my birds, that this was a bookstore owned by maybe elves or gnomes or something. And I blame Terry Pratchett and Travis Baldry books that I've been reading this month for that. So I wanted a sign on the first floor to say books in some sort of strange language. And so I looked up a random language with an interesting script, and I made some modifications to be this, whatever it is. Another thing I did to make this a bit more like an alternate reality is that I'm messing with the perspective here. Not as, profound as an M.C. Escher drawing, but I'm subtly making the perspective lines expand a bit where they should be converging. Just a hint. And putting the largest part of the building on the top, which is not generally done. So this is just strange enough that you're more likely to feel it's imaginary, but not so different that you'd wonder what the heck it is. And part of the storybook element to this is where the horizon line is, where the viewer is positioned, which is not at ground level, but about midway up, actually right between the second and third floors there. This is not our typical vantage point in real life, so in a way, we're observing, but we're not directly involved. And whatever story is in your head when you see this, well, that's just perfect. I love it. I think overall it ended up looking pretty nice, and I think it kind of got that colorful, quirky sort of feel across, kind of dynamic, and I will call that a success. Some people have asked me where my ideas come from, and I'll tell you, I don't always know. Sometimes I'm just following a path that seems to be there, and I'm just following it wherever it goes. I can tell you how this one came together, though, more or less, and it won't surprise you that it wasn't a fully fleshed out picture in my head. I started in roughing in that tower peak, because just compositionally I knew about where I'd want a focus point using the rule of thirds. There are many different pleasing composition guidelines, but this is an easy one if you're not doing a number of thumbnail sketches first. I felt I needed some sort of weight on the right side, so I had this vision of a rocky sort of cliff, and by the time I sketched that in, the roundness of the cliff edge reminded me of snow, so I kind of went with that. And that slope on that side kind of made me want to fall off the page to the left, so I added this big evergreen tree on that side. So now we've got this kind of visual tunnel with our tower peak sort of rising up in the middle of this funnel. I thought I was going to be drawing a whole building there, but I thought that it felt better just being simple, and I kind of made it an observation deck with apparently no stairs. And when I drew that in, I could now see in my head the rest of the background, maybe this dark valley and the mountains in the background. And it would have been fine to leave it like that compositionally, but I sort of wanted to work a bit on the right third of the page. And these bunnies, I don't know, they just appeared, as they do. I figured they needed to have something to look at besides a big observation tower. And again, as is so often the case, an octopus appeared. You might also notice that we've got two triangles compositionally. One we talked about, the cool colored funnel between the cliffs and the tree. And we've also got a warm colored triangle with the red observation deck at the peak and these warm rabbits and mushrooms at the base. I originally thought of white snow bunnies, but the warmer color seemed to be needed to pull it all together. Anyway, a long and windy tale of how this simple drawing came to be. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Now, if anyone happens to have a medevac helicopter at their disposal, I know of an octopus in need. Oh, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I sure do appreciate it. And if you had fun, consider giving the video a like or post a comment. I read all of them. And maybe subscribe. That'd be great. Oh, here comes a helicopter. I gotta go. Bye-bye.